Sam Altman asked for $7 trillion to build a global network of semiconductor factories, and every major chipmaker on the planet told him no. TSMC's executives reportedly called him a podcasting bro. NVIDIA's chief executive said the plan would require 14 planets and 3 galaxies. The entire semiconductor industry treated it as a joke. But here is what nobody expected. The plan that failed did not disappear. It quietly mutated into something worth $1.4 trillion in stacked commitments, backed by SoftBank, NVIDIA, AMD, Oracle, Microsoft, Amazon, and OpenAI. OpenAI's own chief executive now admits the total is significantly more than the company can currently afford. The $7 trillion plan that was supposed to be the punchline became the foundation for the most expensive corporate bet in history. And the story of how that happened, including what his former board members have said about the way he operates, is what this video is about. The Wall Street Journal broke the original story on February 8th, 2024. Reporters Keech Hagee and Asa Fitch revealed that OpenAI's chief executive had been holding quiet conversations with investors in the United Arab Emirates about reshaping the world's entire semiconductor capacity, with a price tag between $5 and $7 trillion. According to the journal, the vision called for a network of new chip fabrication plants operated by TSMC, the Taiwan-based manufacturer behind roughly 90% of the world's most advanced processors. OpenAI would guarantee demand as the single largest buyer, and Middle Eastern sovereign capital would fund construction. The Register ran the math and estimated that at roughly $20 billion per leading-edge fab, $7 trillion could theoretically fund around 350 fabrication plants. For perspective, the entire annual capital expenditure of TSMC in 2023 was $32 billion, which meant this proposal represented 219 times what the world's most advanced chipmaker spends in a year. CNBC flagged that the figure came from a single source and could not be independently confirmed, and Axios columnist Felix Salmon called it preposterous. The public rejection was fast and brutal. 4 days later, at the World Government Summit in Dubai, NVIDIA chief executive Jensen Huang answered the question of how many GPUs $7 trillion could buy with a line Bloomberg captured perfectly. He said, apparently all the GPUs, then told the audience that if you assume computers never get faster, you might conclude we need 14 planets, 3 galaxies, and 4 more suns. His realistic estimate for AI infrastructure investment landed at around $2 trillion, spread over 4 to 5 years. TSMC chairman C.C. Wei piled on at the company's June 2024 shareholders meeting, telling attendees, according to Tom's Hardware, that Sam Altman is too aggressive for me to believe. The New York Times later reported that during an earlier TSMC visit, the chief executive had proposed 36 new fabs in a single conversation, and TSMC executives reportedly dismissed him as a podcasting bro, so the original plan was dead on arrival. But what replaced it makes the $7 trillion ask look almost modest, and the way it came together raises questions that go far beyond ambition. Understanding the full picture requires going back to the 5 days that nearly destroyed OpenAI from the inside. On November 17, 2023, 4 board members, including co-founder Ilya Sutskever, voted to fire the chief executive for not being consistently candid in his communications with the board. He returned 5 days later after a mass employee revolt. But buried inside that crisis was a Bloomberg report from November 19, 2023, revealing he had been separately fundraising for a chip venture codenamed Tigris, approaching SoftBank's founder Masayoshi Son, the Saudi Public Investment Fund. and Abu Dhabi's Mubadala for tens of billions of dollars, all for a project that was not part of his role at OpenAI. Tigris was the seed version of the $7 trillion pitch that came 3 months later, and it appears to be one of the reasons the board lost confidence in the first place. Former board member Helen Toner confirmed the broader pattern in a May 2024 interview with the TED AI show, alleging that for years the chief executive had withheld information, misrepresented company developments, and in some cases, outright lied to the board. She claimed he had presented himself as having no financial interest in the company while simultaneously controlling the OpenAI startup fund outright, a fact OpenAI later confirmed, describing it as an administrative convenience. What came out next made that pattern even harder to dismiss. According to Wired and the Wall Street Journal, the chief executive personally invested more than $1 million in Rain Neuromorphics, a chip startup, in 2018. OpenAI then signed a $51 million letter of intent to buy Rain's chips in 2019, creating the kind of overlap between personal investments and company procurement that corporate governance experts consistently flag as problematic. A national security review later forced a Saudi-linked investor to divest from Rain entirely, a remedy attorneys told Wired had largely been reserved for Chinese investors. The Wall Street Journal reporter Berber Jin documented the full scope across multiple investigations, revealing a personal portfolio spanning more than 400 companies, worth roughly $2.8 billion, anchored by a $375 million investment into Helion Energy and $180 million into Retro Biosciences. The April 2026 investigation reported that the chief executive asked OpenAI itself to lead a funding round for Helion at a roughly $35 billion valuation, with a potential $500 million investment from OpenAI. Internal objections prevailed, and the deal was restructured into an electricity purchase arrangement. But the overlap between the chief executive's personal portfolio and OpenAI's corporate spending was now extensively documented by multiple outlets. According to Reuters, the restructured OpenAI gives its chief executive no equity at all, a detail that raises its own questions given the scale of his adjacent investments. And through all of this, the spending only grew. The original Foundry plan quietly died by October 2024, according to Reuters and Bloomberg. OpenAI shelved the idea of building semiconductor factories entirely, assembled a small silicon team of about 20 people led by former Google chip engineers Thomas Norrie and Richard Ho, and partnered with Broadcom to design custom inference chips that TSMC would fabricate. The $7 trillion plan was gone. What replaced it was far more expensive in aggregate, and it came together within months. January 2025 brought the Stargate project, announced at a press conference as a commitment of $500 billion over 4 years for AI data center infrastructure, with $100 billion to deploy immediately. SoftBank, Oracle, and MGX, an Abu Dhabi AI investment vehicle, signed on as partners, with SoftBank's Masayoshi Son as chairman and Oracle's Larry Ellison headlining the announcement. The flagship site would be built in Abilene, Texas. But Bloomberg reported in August 2025 that no funds had been raised toward the $500 billion headline, and SoftBank's chief financial officer, Yoshimitsu Goto, conceded the project needs more time. Confirmed debt financing stood at only $12.3 billion against that $100 billion immediate commitment. The information reported in February 2026 that Stargate LLC had hired no staff and was not actively developing data centers more than a year after launch. Oracle and OpenAI shelved a 600-megawatt Abilene expansion in March 2026. And just this month, according to CNBC on April 9th, OpenAI paused its Stargate UK project entirely, citing energy costs and regulation. 6 days later, CNBC reported that OpenAI also abandoned its Stargate Norway data center deal, with Microsoft stepping in to take the capacity instead. Meta then hired 3 of OpenAI's top infrastructure leads, including Stargate's Peter Hoschela, according to reporting on April 11th. Stargate alone would have been the biggest infrastructure bet in AI history, but OpenAI stacked even more on top of it. September 2025 brought a $100 billion NVIDIA pact covering 10 gigawatts of deployment, though NVIDIA's chief financial officer, Colette Kress, admitted 2 months later at a UBS conference that no definitive agreement had been completed. October delivered a 6-gigawatt AMD deal with a warrant for up to 10% of AMD's entire company. Broadcom disclosed a $10 billion custom chip order widely attributed to OpenAI. Microsoft retained a $250 billion Azure commitment. According to Data Center Dynamics, in April 2026, the chief executive acknowledged that the stacked total now reaches roughly $1.4 trillion and described it as significantly more than the company can currently afford. The $7 trillion plan that everyone laughed at has been replaced by $1.4 trillion in real obligations, and the company behind it all still cannot pay for what it has already promised. OpenAI's own financial disclosures show exactly how wide that gap is, according to OpenAI's chief financial officer, Sarah Frier, confirmed in January 2026. Full-year revenue for 2024 came to $6 billion, with an annualized run rate reaching $20 billion by the end of 2025. The company reported a loss of roughly $5 billion in 2024 alone, according to the New York Times and CNBC. Internal documents reported by the Wall Street Journal and Fortune projected cumulative losses through 2029 approaching $115 billion, with a possible $74 billion operating loss in 2028 alone. The valuation moved sharply in the opposite direction, reaching $852 billion after a $122 billion round closed March 2026, with Amazon at $50 billion, NVIDIA at $30 billion, and SoftBank at $30 billion, according to Bloomberg. As of April 2026, the Financial Times reported that some of OpenAI's own investors are questioning whether the valuation can be justified given competition from Anthropic. The talent departures over this same period tell their own story. Ilya Sutskever resigned in May 2024 to launch Safe Superintelligence, now valued near $30 billion. John Leakey quit 3 days later, writing publicly that OpenAI's safety culture and processes have taken a backseat to shiny products. Co-founder John Schulman left for Anthropic in August. Chief Technology Officer Mira Murati, Chief Research Officer Bob McGrew, and Vice President of Research Barrett Zoff all departed on the same day in September. The super alignment team had already been dissolved. New York University professor emeritus Gary Marcus captured the scale of the skepticism when he wrote that the $7 trillion ask represented almost 10 times what the country spends on schools in a year, and 21 times the estimated cost of ending world hunger. Former Evernote chief executive Phil Libin warned that a collapse of this scale could set back legitimate AI development for another decade. The $7 trillion plan failed. Nobody disputes that. What replaced it is $1.4 trillion in stacked commitments that the company admits it cannot afford, built on a valuation of $852 billion that its own investors are now questioning, led by a chief executive whose overlapping personal investments have been documented across multiple investigations, and staffed by a leadership team that has lost its co-founder, its chief scientist, its chief technology officer, its chief research officer, and the entire team responsible for long-term AI safety. The Stargate projects in the United Kingdom and Norway have been paused or abandoned just this month. The governance concerns first raised in November 2023 have not been resolved. The Wall Street Journal's April 2026 investigation reported that the board pledged to fix the problem, but it never did. When a company losing billions every quarter convinces the world's largest investors to keep writing checks in the hundreds of billions, that is either visionary leadership or the biggest financial bubble the technology industry has ever produced. Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want to stay ahead of the biggest moves in AI infrastructure, the ones Wall Street watches but most people never hear about, subscribe to Tech Impact Report, because we cover this every single week.